183,000 workers, 7 years of construction, 666 talents of gold arriving in a single year, roughly 25 metric tons, worth over $2 billion at today's prices. 10,000 cedar logs floated down the Mediterranean coast from Lebanon, covering 250 miles of open water. Foundation stones weighing 500 tons, heavier than anything the builders of the Great Pyramid ever moved. And the total bill? Conservative modern estimates place the cost of Solomon's temple between $170 billion and $216 billion. The International Space Station, the single most expensive construction project in human history, cost $150 billion. Solomon's temple surpassed it. In the 10th century BC, without cranes, the hydraulics or electricity. Now here is the detail that breaks every rule of construction logic. 1 Kings 6:7 records that the entire structure, every wall, every column, every massive foundation block, was assembled on site without the sound of a hammer, chisel, or any iron tool. Not a single clang of metal on stone. A building the size of a modern cathedral erected in total silence. 183,000 workers, and not one of them was permitted to strike a chisel on the construction site. But here's what they don't tell you in Sunday school. The temple that became Israel's holiest structure, the earthly dwelling place of the God who freed Hebrew slaves from Egypt, was itself built on the backs of forced laborers, enslaved descendants of conquered nations. And the man who ordered its construction, the wisest king who ever lived, would set in motion a chain of political fractures so catastrophic that within 5 years of his death, the kingdom would rip itself in two. The temple's glory and the nation's collapse were not separate stories. They were the same story. So how did they actually do it? How do you cut 500-ton stones with Bronze Age tools and transport them miles without wheels capable of bearing that weight? How do you assemble a building of that precision in total silence? Where did a desert kingdom find enough gold to outspend every modern government on Earth? Who designed the floor plan? And why was no human architect ever credited? And the question nobody seems to ask: if God wanted a house, why did he make it so astronomically difficult to build one? The answers begin with a dying king and a room full of gold. Jerusalem, approximately 970 BC. A private chamber in the royal compound, heavy with the smell of cedar oil and warm linen. David, the warrior king, the giant killer, the man whose name would define an entire dynasty, is not standing tall on a battlefield. He is hunched over a table buried in inventory scrolls, his hands shaking, his breath shallow. He is dying. He knows it. But the documents spread before him are not last rites or farewell blessings. They are construction blueprints, material lists, labor projections, workforce rotations. The dying king is not preparing for his funeral. He is project managing the most expensive building in human history. A building he has been forbidden to construct. Or 1 Chronicles 28:11-12. Records that David handed Solomon the plans for every component of the temple: the portico, the storerooms, the upper rooms, the inner chambers, the place of atonement. David claimed these plans came directly from the hand of God upon him. And he had not just drawn blueprints. He had spent decades stockpiling materials with an intensity that bordered on obsession. 1 Chronicles 22:14 preserves the staggering figure he reported to Solomon: 100,000 talents of gold and 1 million talents of silver, along with bronze and iron beyond weighing. Let that number build. 100,000 talents of gold equals approximately 3,750 metric tons. At current market prices, roughly $75 million per metric ton, David's gold reserve alone was worth over $280 billion. A treasury larger than the GDP of most modern nations, assembled by one man for one building. But David would never lift a single stone. The theological logic is devastatingly simple. David had blood on his hands. Blood meant death. Death was incompatible with a house of life. A house of life required clean hands, and David's hands had held too many swords. God told him directly. 1 Chronicles 22:8 documents the words, "You have shed much blood and have fought many wars. You are not to build a house for my name because you have shed much blood on the earth in my sight." The greatest king in Israel's history told he was not clean enough to lay a foundation, so he did the only thing left to him. He prepared everything: the gold, the silver, the bronze, the cedar, the marble, the plans, and handed it all to his son Solomon. Not a battle-tested commander, not a seasoned ruler, a young man who had never fought a war. Standing in the orbit of these final preparations were two figures worth remembering. The first, a young official named Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite whom 1 Kings 11:28 describes as industrious and capable. Solomon would eventually place him over the entire forced labor contingent from the northern tribes. The second, Adoniram, the chief overseer of the corvée, the state-run forced labor system that would become the temple's engine and the kingdom's deepest wound. Remember those names. Both of them will return at the worst possible moment. In Solomon now possessed his father's God-given blueprints, his father's impossible treasury, and a divine mandate no king had ever carried. He had the gold, he had the plans, he had the authority of heaven behind him. But gold doesn't cut itself. Cedar doesn't float across the sea on its own. And 250,000 tons of limestone doesn't climb a mountain by divine command. Solomon needed partners, and his first move would have shocked every priest in Jerusalem. Solomon's first act as temple builder would have stunned the religious establishment. He sent a message to a pagan king. 1 Kings 5:6 preserves his words to Hiram, king of Tyre, "Give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me." Not a prayer to God for miraculous provision. Not a summons to Israelite lumbermen. A trade negotiation with a Phoenician monarch who worshipped Baal. And the price was staggering. 20,000 cores of wheat and 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil delivered annually for the duration of the project. That translates to roughly 125,000 bushels of grain and 120,000 gallons of oil every single year, shipped north to a foreign capital. Israel was feeding another nation's population to construct its holiest structure. Hiram sent back more than timber. He sent a master craftsman, a man also named Hiram, sometimes called Huram Abi, described in 2 Chronicles 2:14 as skilled in gold, silver, bronze, iron, stone, wood, purple fabric, blue and crimson yarn, and fine linen. A genius across every medium the temple would require. But this man was half Tyrian and half Israelite. Not a priest, not a Levite, not even fully Hebrew. A craftsman of mixed blood and almost certainly mixed worship. The hands that would shape the temple's most sacred furnishings had likely also shaped idols for Phoenician altars. The holiest objects in Israel's faith, formed by a man the religious establishment would never have allowed through the temple doors as a worshiper, now descend into the place where the real work happened. Below the streets of what is now Jerusalem's Old City, Solomon's quarries open into a cavern stretching over 9,000 square meters, an underground cathedral carved entirely by human muscle. The air down here is cool and chalky. Limestone dust hangs so thick it coats your tongue and burns the corners of your eyes. Torchlight flickers against chisel marks that are still visible in the rock face 3,000 years later. This is where the foundation stones were born. 1 Kings 5:15-16 documents the workforce assigned to this underworld. 70,000 carriers, 80,000 stonecutters working the hills, and 3,300 foremen supervising the operation. The stonecutters labored underground for months at a stretch, cutting blocks with bronze chisels and copper saws fed with wet sand as an abrasive. Each stone was measured, shaped, and dressed to its final specification entirely in the quarry. Every edge, every angle, every surface finished before it ever saw daylight. That is how the silence at the construction site was achieved. Not a supernatural miracle, not divine levitation, a system of prefabrication so obsessively precise that every block arrived at the Temple Mount ready to place without a single additional cut. Quarried, measured, addressed, transported, positioned, sealed. Like precision-manufactured components from an ancient factory floor, each stone had one designated slot, one correct orientation, one exact fit, and the men cutting in the dark had to get it perfect without ever seeing where their work would go. But one engineering mystery refuses to close. Some of the stones in the Temple Mount's retaining walls, blocks still visible today in the Western Wall, weigh between 500 and 70 tons. Modern engineers have proposed ramps, wooden rollers, bronze levers, and coordinated teams of hundreds pulling in unison. None of these theories has been successfully demonstrated at that scale, using only Bronze Age technology. How those stones were placed remains an open question, and the men who knew the answer have been dead for 3 millennia. The engineering was extraordinary, but the question of whose hands performed it carries a weight that no limestone block can match. Put yourself in the sandals of one of those 70,000 carriers. You did not volunteer for this. 1 Kings 5:13-14 records that Solomon conscripted a rotating labor force of 30,000 men from all Israel, 10,000 per month sent to Lebanon, 1 month cutting timber, 2 months home. Hard work, but temporary, shared, survivable. That was the arrangement for Israelites. For everyone else, the arrangement was permanent. 1 Kings 9:20-21 reveals the division plainly. The descendants of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, the remnants of peoples Israel had conquered but never fully destroyed, Solomon conscripted into permanent forced labor. No rotation, no 2 months home. No end date. Read that again. The temple of the God who liberated Hebrew slaves from Egyptian bondage was built by the enslaved descendants of conquered peoples. Your grandfather quarried this same limestone. Your father hauled it up the ramp on his back. Now you kneel on raw stone, smoothing a block with a sandstone abrasive until your hands crack and bleed, preparing a surface for a sanctuary you will never be permitted to enter, dedicated to a God you were never invited to worship. How many of these laborers died in those underground quarries? How many were crushed beneath stones that slipped from bronze rollers? The biblical text does not record a single casualty figure. That silence is its own kind of answer. Above this foundation of sweat and coerced labor, the temple itself rose, and its dimensions were shockingly modest for a project of such expense. 1 Kings 6:2 records the measurements: 60 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, 30 cubits high, roughly 90 feet by 30 feet by 45 feet. Smaller than most modern suburban churches. Not a grand arena, not a sprawling complex, a concentrated vessel designed for a single impossible purpose, containing the presence of God. The interior was lined floor to ceiling with cedar shipped from Lebanon, every surface carved with intricate patterns of gourds, open flowers, cherubim, and palm trees. Then the cedar was overlaid with gold. Not gold leaf, the thin decorative layer used in modern gilding. Gold plates. 1 Kings 6:22 documents it without ambiguity. The entire interior was overlaid with gold. Walls, floor, ceiling, altar, so every visible surface encased in hammered gold so thick that torchlight entering the main hall would have bounced and multiplied until the room itself seemed to burn from within. The innermost chamber, the most holy place, was a perfect cube, 20 cubits by 20 cubits by 20 cubits. Inside stood 2 cherubim carved from olive wood, each 15 feet tall, their outstretched wings spanning the full width of the room. Wingtip touching wingtip at the center, outer wings touching the walls on either side. They too were overlaid with gold. The estimated weight of gold used for the interior alone exceeds 20 metric tons, over 44,000 pounds of gold, sealed inside a room that only one man, once a year, would ever enter. 7 years passed. 183,000 workers deployed. Forests stripped bare across Lebanon. $250 billion in materials consumed. Forced laborers ground down in lightless quarries beneath Jerusalem. Foreign kings fed and flattered. And at last, it was finished. Every stone placed, every wall golden, every cherub wing stretched wide in the darkness of the inner chamber, waiting. But the construction was never the point. The real moment, the one that every stone, every log, every talent of gold, and every broken laborer's body had been building toward, was still to come. Now walk the final approach. 2 Chronicles 5 preserves what happened next, and it demands to be taken slowly. The Ark of the Covenant, that gold-covered acacia chest holding the original stone tablets Moses carried down from Sinai, is lifted onto the shoulders of priests. They step forward. But through the outer courts, past the massive bronze pillars Jachin and Boaz standing 27 feet tall like sentinels framing the entrance, through the main hall, where gold-plated walls catch the torchlight and throw it back in rippling, liquid waves across the ceiling, past the golden altar of incense, where thin smoke rises in vertical threads through still air, past the embroidered veil separating the holy from the most holy, into the inner chamber, the perfect cube, beneath the outstretched wings of 2 golden cherubim whose wingtips nearly brush the priests' heads as they pass underneath. The poles of the ark are so long that their ends remain visible from the holy place in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from outside, a detail preserved in Scripture for reasons no one has fully explained. Said the priests set the ark down between the cherubim. They step back. They withdraw from the chamber. Silence. Then, every Levitical musician stationed in the courts, 120 priests raising silver trumpets to their lips, singers gripping cymbals and harps and lyres, all of them at once, lifted a single unified sound. 2 Chronicles 5:13 preserves the words, "He is good. His love endures forever." And then it happened. The temple filled with a cloud. Priests stumbled, legs buckled. Hands reached for walls and found nothing solid to grip. Trained ministers of the sanctuary, men who had rehearsed these rituals for months, collapsed where they stood. Their vision blurred. Their strength drained as though gravity itself had doubled inside the chamber. 2 Chronicles 5:14 documents it with the restraint of an eyewitness report. The priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. Not fog rolling in from the valley, not incense smoke thickening in an enclosed space. The Shekinah, the visible, physical, crushing weight of God's presence, so dense it dropped grown men to the floor like a force with mass. Why that moment? Not when the foundation stones were laid, not when the gold was hammered onto the walls, not when the ark crossed the threshold. God's presence entered when the musicians played in unified praise. Why sound was the trigger? Why worship unlocked what engineering alone could not? Remains one of the most debated theological mysteries in biblical scholarship. The text records the effect. It never explains the mechanism. And standing at the center of this moment, Solomon spread his hands toward heaven. 1 Kings 8:27 preserves his prayer, and it contains a confession that should stop every architect, every engineer, every theologian mid-breath. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built. The man who spent $250 billion and 7 years and 183,000 lives building a house for God stood inside it and publicly questioned whether God could fit. And here is where every number from the opening finds its heartbeat. The 70,000 carriers who never understood why they suffered, this was why. And the 80,000 stonecutters who shaped rock in underground darkness, they carved the vessel that held this moment. The 7 years of enforced silence on the construction site, it was rehearsal for the one sound that brought God into the room. They cut stones they would never see placed. They carried gold they would never touch again. They built in silence for a sound they had never heard. Until now. The temple stood complete. The glory filled it. But the system that raised those walls was already fracturing beneath them. Remember Jeroboam, the industrious young official Solomon promoted to oversee the northern forced labor gangs. 1 Kings 11:26-40 records what happened next. The prophet Ahijah intercepted Jeroboam on a road outside Jerusalem wearing a brand new garment. Without a word of explanation, Ahijah seized the cloak and tore it into 12 pieces. He handed Jeroboam 10. Then he spoke, words that functioned as a divine death sentence for the United Kingdom. God would rip 10 tribes from Solomon's line because Solomon's heart had turned to foreign gods. The labor overseer became the chosen instrument of national fracture. And remember Adoniram, the chief of the corvée, the man who managed the forced labor machine for the entirety of the temple's construction. When Solomon died and his son Rehoboam inherited the throne, the northern tribes came with a single demand: lighten the crushing labor burden your father placed on us. Rehoboam refused. He threatened to make it worse. Then he made the worst possible decision. He sent Adoniram, the living symbol of their oppression, to negotiate. 1 Kings 12:18 records the result in 5 words that read like a hammer strike. All Israel stoned him to death. The overseer of the temple's workforce, killed by the very people he had driven into the quarries. The kingdom split in 2, 10 tribes gone. The temple still stood on Mount Moriah, but the nation that bled to build it shattered around its foundation. And the temple itself? In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar's Babylonian army breached Jerusalem's walls. 2 Kings 25:9 documents the end without ceremony. He set fire to the temple of the Lord. The cedar from Lebanon burned. The gold plates stripped and hauled to Babylon. The bronze pillars Jachin and Boaz, those 27-foot sentinels, broken into pieces and melted down. The most holy place, where God's presence had fallen like a weight on the bodies of priests, gutted to bare stone, and the Ark of the Covenant, the single object the entire temple had been designed, funded, and built to house, vanished. No biblical text records its destruction. No Babylonian inventory claims it as plunder. No prophet describes its fate. It simply disappears from the historical record and never resurfaces. 3,000 years of searching, speculation, and silence. Where is it? No one knows. That mystery remains open. $216 billion, 183,000 workers, 7 years, forests leveled, nations fed, lives ground to dust in underground quarries. And within 4 centuries, all that remained was ash, memory, and a single retaining wall in Jerusalem, where people still press their foreheads against ancient stone and weep for what once filled the space above. What are you building that will outlast you? If you could stand inside that temple for a single moment, before the fire, before the exile, before the gold was stripped and the ark disappeared, would you choose to witness the silence of its construction or the sound that brought God into the room?